Throughout the history of the world of Obispra, the mortal race's reliance on conquest, power, greed, and ambition would be a driving force, pushing them over hills that they wouldn't otherwise climb. Whether these hills be beneficial or detrimental mainly relied on the actions or influence of an individual, and yet no climbing of hills, or even mountains for that matter, would allow one to foresee the fall of the western continent, Teudraur. Obispra is many things, but its supreme natural beauty is only superseded by its danger. Take for instance the last city of Teudraur, Marathon. Built on a protected peninsula, Marathon has proven time and again that it is uniquely stalwart against this danger. What made the city so unique during the past crises is unknown, but in the present year, 102 MS, or Marathon's singularity, Marathon's, shall we say, uniqueness is all but evident. Marathon has a population of around 1 million individuals, confined to an area of around 6 miles in diameter. This means that housing and space is planned out and optimized to the utmost in order to maximize the number of people who live in a building or space. And the people of Marathon are incredibly mixed in race, culture, and belief. Yet little to no conflict breaks out between these groups, even though they are so confined. And why is this the case? How can so many differing opinions and ideas exist so well together? Well, that is because they all know what lurks beyond the city walls. They know what attempts to weasel its way past the outposts at the edge of the forest. And this fear of the same thing that drove their ancestors and families into Marathon has become a uniting force for all of them. Teudraur was once a normal place, with numerous small cities, towns, and trading posts dotted around the eastern continent and inland. Yet around 100 years after Marathon was founded, strange maladies occurred. First, the malady of the plains. A large area around 40 miles north of Marathon became strange. Plant life would no longer grow, and animals would avoid these great plains entirely, with the land slowly warping as time passed. Second, a sickness quickly spread across the continent and all of its cities and towns. Yet this plague wasn't just some sickness of the body. Once it literally took root, it robbed those infected of both mind and body, making them extremely violent and extra durable, though the infected still showed some basic animalistic intelligence, resulting in the use of overwhelming force and pack tactics. This Red Plague, as it was dubbed, was the main driving force behind the downfall of the continent. And even though the rumors of its existence spread quickly, the plague itself was never far behind. As it spread down from the north, many towns evacuated, and luckily for those people, Marathon stood awaiting them with open arms and high walls. The plague spread, and Marathon grew and grew, until it was at the point where it is today. The bells of the plague tolled for another 100 years, until it was proclaimed that the last of the infected were wiped out, leaving the residents of Marathon in cold awe. 10 years before the plague was announced to have been quashed, the final malady, the malady of the earth, more commonly referred to as the Shift, occurred. The Shift was an explosive seismic event that literally tore the city in two. By this time, Marathon was the last city on the continent, and the districts were settled and the outermost walls were built. But the split resulted in hundreds of thousands of gold worth in damages, and literally pulled the district of Usaibon 180 feet into the air, separated by a sheer stone cliff. Later on, this cliff would be used for mining, and 11 years before the beginning of our primary story, the excavations resulted in finding an entirely new race called the Warforged, who, though initially were viewed with suspicion and worry, soon became the hardest working and most well-liked of Marathon's residents. As of now, years 102 MS, and Marathon stands as the last bastion of mortality upon Teudraur. The start of our story lands on the date 10/28/102, the 28th day of the 10th month of the 15-month cycle of Obispra. It is the last day of the Amber Corridor, Marathon's harvest festival, and a signal of the soon-to-be-coming winter. Hi guys, welcome to your recap. I hope you enjoyed that quick description of the world. It's been about half a year since we played, since December actually, so I thought that this might be a cool thing to make so we can look back at it and poke fun at me for any voice cracks I have, or anything that gets retconned in the near future, so that'll be funny. So sit back, relax, and enjoy, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Oh, and quick disclaimer, I have done my best to keep things neutral in terms of personal character development. This is all kind of big story things and things that multiple people were around for. I can send any documents, riddles, or dialogue that I remember to you if you ask for it. And this is about 2 years of story, mostly coming from the recaps that I wrote for each of the sessions. So my writing has changed over time, so you'll probably see that when I'm reading it to you here. But anyways, hope you enjoy. Feel free to ask any questions you may have. The party started off separate, not knowing who anyone was for the most part, with the only connection being between Conk and Moza, who were already great friends and roommates, though we'll introduce them later. As the game began, you were all introduced to the Amber Corridor Festival, a harvest festival which heralded the near end of fall. An abundance of food, drink, and other festivities was made available to you all, and this is where your first new connections with each other were made, specifically in the boxing arena, where some of you definitely didn't cheat to win against other future party members. As the festival continued, loud horns were sounded, and everyone in the immediate area gathered by the nearest stage in preparedness for a speech. The speech was given by Tizca, daughter of one of the council members and a well-known philanthropist in the city. She touted the fantastic harvest, and through her words inspired a sense of ease and camaraderie in the people. The speech was cut short, however, as a gas attack was quickly followed by abductions of people within the crowd who were unlucky enough to breathe in the green fog. This marked the first time that the party had fought together, as you attacked the stragglers of whatever group had engaged in the attack. As the fighting ended, you all ran, but a large force of the city guard closed in, encircling the party and taking you all, as well as the attackers, to jail. At this point, in jail, you all introduced yourselves to each other. Here, the party consisted of Sen, the cloaked and masked satyr druid, Moza, the pixie bard, Conk, the dwarven artificer, Lupin, the Canis artificer, Ding Ding, the owlin monk, Adamant, the warforged fighter, and Semaine, the human rogue. In the cell, as you were being heckled by the guard that locked you in, the woman who was speaking on the podium during the festival walked in while speaking to a more finely dressed half-orc guard. The speaker introduced herself as Tizca, the daughter of a member of the Murata Council, and her companion as Guard Captain William, and Tizca offered you all a proposition. In return for your help, not only would you be freed from prison, but you would also be paid for your services in returning her brother, who had been kidnapped during the attack on the festival, and bringing justice to those attackers. You all accepted, and immediately got to work investigating the alleyway from which the attackers had sprung from, finding vials of a green liquid broken right next to an easily removable sewer grate. Entering, you crawled for a while through a smaller tunnel, but eventually found yourselves in larger sewer tunnels where you had the freedom to move around. Exploring these larger tunnels, you found yourselves in a room with an unknown tiefling man, though he was likely one of the ones kidnapped, being used as some sort of ritual, their blood upon a white wax circle, and some candles of the same wax on the floor. While investigating, you were all ambushed, finding some of the same kinds of foes that had attacked the festival. Finding them off, you investigated more into the sewer, finding a few things. First, a strange dark room wherein a large vine grabbed a body and pulled it away into the darkness. And second, you found a room with strange gears and cogs, though you could not discern what their use was. Lastly, you found a high-hanging drain attached to one of the walls and overlooking a large cliff. Here, you took a short rest and Afterwards, continued your adventure into the sewer. Moving further, you encountered a duck and a strange homeless man who lived in an extremely dark and secluded part of the sewers. The man's name was Samson, and he answered all of your questions to the best of his ability, though you could tell that his brain kind of wasn't all there. He talked about the Undertown, its leader, Freebird, and some shady dealings that had been had with people like the ones you had defeated not too long ago. After this, at your request, Samson led you out of the sewers, and you all returned to the guard station where Tizca awaited you. After briefing her, you all went to your respective homes, or shared with others, and slept. Returning to the guard station the next day, Tizca told you to keep looking into the location mentioned, so you went back to Samson to ask him about the way to the Undertown. He led you to this location, and down below you saw quite the sight. A small city with homes, a market, a couple of workshops, and a central, almost fort, right below the city streets in the sewers. Though all of these buildings were quite run down and barely standing, upon the center island lay the fort, and a multi-storied building wherein you encountered Freebird, the man who was obviously the leader of this place. Freebird was speaking to a man also quite obviously a member of the group that had attacked the festival, and so both of these men were quickly subdued. The party interrogated Freebird, while Sen went into a bag of holding to interrogate the other man. Sen learned that his name was Eli, and forced him to tell everything he knew about the group. The information received was that he was a part of the group called the Ascended Vine. You learned of a meeting location, as well as the fact that information within this group was very compartmentalized, leaving Eli to not know too much. Leaving the Undertown, you all decided to return to the guard station and inform Tizca, who once again paid you for your information, and said that in a few days' time, she would notify you of a potential for a raid of this meeting place. And so, you all took a few days to buy some things and take some downtime. But eventually you were notified of a meeting place and time for the raid, and that night eventually came. You were all greeted outside of a small manor by some people who covered their bodies and faces in cloaks and hoods. Making your way inside the manor, you only ran into more of the strange cultists, but eventually found a hidden trapdoor which took you to a large basement. In the basement, after encountering and dispatching more of the cultists, you ran into an extremely aged elf. His nearly bald, wrinkly head was a strange sight in the underground light, and though your meeting was brief, it was likely that you'd be seeing more of him. He left, calling for a beast of some kind to come out, and this is where you fought the Amalgam. During the fight, the gate to the prison holding the captives was opened, and the party ran into a few people. Firstly, Trissa's brother, Avir, who was the main reason for your being down there, and secondly, a new combatant named Clade. Clade was a half-orc paladin, and with his assistance, you defeated the Amalgam and scoured the basement, where the old man was nowhere to be found, though you did, however, find a strange book in a language unknown to any of you, among other things. That night, everyone in the party had some sort of dream, the details of which I can remind you of if you wish. Reporting back to Tizca, you were all told to lay low for a few days, and so you did. You all went to Conk and Moses' house and took the time that you had to learn more about the book that you found, finding a specific rune that would catch whatever it was written on alight. After those few days were up, you all received a letter, which was an invitation to Trissa's house for a night of luxury, good food, and rewards for helping her find her brother. Here you all received a number of cool things, including Sen's root cloak and the magical rapier Valorius, a sentient weapon that loudly spoke to those around the user. Here's where things deviated, however. As the gifts were presented, a quarrel broke out between Semaine and Moza over who should have possession of the rapier. To settle this, Mosa and Semaine went into a side room to talk about it, though no one was decided on, as Semaine burst out of the room and stormed off, almost in a fit of fright. Sen followed and comforted Semaine, but the sword eventually went to Ding Ding, who would keep it until further notice. Another thing happened as well. Just as the dinner was about to begin, the doors opened, and a large, red-skinned centaur named Volim entered, giving his thanks for assisting Tizca. And in fact, he was the one who supplied the root cloak. Lupin, recognizing a part of a sigil on the centaur's cloak, stood up and called him out, interrupting him and asking what his sigil was. Though he didn't receive an answer to his question, and the centaur plainly and outrightly shut him down. Some vague hostilities were traded, and the centaur left, but the night continued otherwise peacefully. The next day, you all met with Tizca once again at the guard station. She told you that she had no further information for you, as her leads had all dried up, and that your debts for being let out of prison had been squared away. She wished you luck in the future, and said that any further information on the Ascended Vine would be compensated for. You were given the day, and ignoring the elephant in the room, which was the book, you all eventually decided to head back to the Undertown to hopefully glean some more information about their dealings with the Ascended Vine. Lupin wasn't feeling good, decided to stay home, but here in the Undertown, disaster struck. As you all wandered through the Undertown, doing your own things, Semaine wandered off, getting as far away from Mosa as she could due to the previous night's activities. She climbed into a barricaded section of the town, going through a large rent or hole in the wall where she discovered a small cave, though she didn't know that it was already occupied. A bear had found its way into the sewers and found Semaine and mauled her, and by the time that the party made it to her, it was too late. Sen, wrought with desperate grief for her new friend, poured her druidic magic into Semaine in an attempt to save her life, making her go unconscious in the process, and, in a way, managing to save her. As the party began making their way out of the Undertown with Semaine's body, Semaine attempted to bite Adamant, though due to his metallic form, to no avail. Though still feeling the pain, Adamant dropped her, her body no longer limp. She stood and looked over you all, backing away into the corner, her eyes wild. As Sen tried to calm her down, Mosa used her magic, in the form of an illusion, to blast a loud horn right behind Semaine's head, causing her to once again go wild and jump into the water of the sewer. Sen, seeing this almost reanimation, you immediately thought back to the plagues that you had heard about previously, with animated dead and such, and after confirming it with Freebird, decided that the best course of action was to tell the city council what had happened. And as everyone was leaving, Lupin and a new figure, Odin, walked into the sewers. You all eventually found yourselves telling this story to the council, meeting all but one of its members, those being Koenig, Jolpo, Render, Trissa's mother Claudia, Alito, Oshia, and Cincia. The council bid you all to find Semaine, before whatever was happening could progress further, and with help from Councilmember Alito, you all scried her location and found out that she was still in the sewers. After around 4 hours, you returned to the sewers, asking Samson if you could borrow his raft to traverse them. After some ups and downs, you all find yourselves in what appears to be an abandoned sewer village, a large cistern drain in the center. Looking in one of the nearby houses, you all found a lizard folk man named Su Ajvak, who told you of what had happened. His story went, as Semaine had walked into the area, she fell over and was caught by the leader of the camp, biting him, and in response, said leader pushed her into the cistern. Following this, you all had your first run-in with those infected by Semaine, as they would change, becoming mindless, frail creatures of plant and flesh. You all continued after Semaine, following her trail, and eventually finding yourselves back on the surface, as flames covered the part of the city that you were in. What followed was a fever dream of running from infected and trying to find a way out, leading as many civilians as you could to safety. Upon reaching a gate with no activity, you were met by a closed portcullis, and eventually the council member Koenig appeared, who had barred everyone in the district in, forbidding any passage through the gates anywhere. As the party and civilians pleaded, Koenig turned away from everyone and walked away. Time here was short, however, as a collapsing building led to the infected seeing your group, forcing you away from the gatehouse and into safer tidings. Eventually, the party found a warehouse to hide in. Here, Sen looked over the injured and attempted her first cure. Though it was painful and quite loud, Sen did manage to eventually cure somebody at the cost of the shelter that you were in. As infected began banging on the large doors, they began to splinter, and the party led everyone out of the back window and onto a side street. However, one dwarf man, Ulysses, who was in the advanced stages of the infection, was unable to leave, so Odin stayed behind with Ulysses and helped to ease him back into the afterlife. Following this, you all found another shelter, a brewery that lasted much longer than the first warehouse did. Here, Sen cured the rest of the infected, while Moza went out, searching for supplies and people. She eventually found some of the guards at one of the gates, who were handing out supplies, and with Konk's help, you brought them back to the survivors. She also told the guards that there was a cure for the infection, and was given permission to lead everyone to the gate in a few days' time. As this was happening, you all discovered Atha in the basement of the brewery, and in return for letting you all stay there, he requested that you kill someone, heavily implied to be Koenig, but no names were actually ever spoken. Eventually, a strange new kind of infected was found. It was almost like a walking tree of flesh and white mycelia, but it was fast and strong. The doors were broken down, and eventually you were all forced to run, this time finding a mill with survivors already inside. At odds with them at first, the arrival of Mosa turned them around, and they allowed everyone inside. After some time in this mill, with Odin going through the previous inhabitants' things and being caught, and Mosa leading a troll that was found earlier into a safer place that he could actually fit into, the day came where you were all going to leave and head to the gate, but not before dispatching a massive fusion of undead biomass that was blocking it. Making your way to the council's war room within a nearby bar on the clean side of the city, Koenig was outraged to see you, but eventually settled down. Alito scryed the location of Semaine again, seeing that she was still in the sewers, and a plan was made. You all, Koenig and Jolbo, would head down into the sewers once again, while the council and the city guard, using councilmember Cynthia's airship, would firebomb the entire district of Iana, where the infection was taking place. You agreed with this plan, and made your way into the sewers once again. Heading down into there was easy enough, as you retraced your steps from before. You found your way into a massive chamber where putrid green water, as well as noticeable movement from within, could be seen from all around. As you approached the center of the room, you could see a turned Semaine, a ghastly white character in her tattered clothing. She looked extremely frail, and as you all approached, she was lifted into the air on a large tendril of white mycelia, green plant matter, and coagulated and congealed flesh that reaches down from the ceiling and pulls it back up towards it into the shadows. Just as soon as it had pulled Semaine up into the shadows, the beast's head and more arms of flesh and mycelia and plant came down from the ceiling. It writhed and emitted an unimaginably horrible sound, and combat began. This fight was no easy task, and though you had a few extra capable warriors, it was still challenging. This creature destroyed the battlefield around you, and you were all pushed around and off the remaining platforms into the water where the thing was still writhing. Though you were all finally able to bring down the creature, and as it fell, it screamed out the sound rang throughout the sewers, and it landed on and destroyed the remaining platform that you were on, forcing you all into the water. Immediately, sharp pains could be felt all across the party, as cuts formed and infections may have taken hold. However, Samain, now finally open to your attacks, was put down, and whatever mass that was in the water ceased its movement. Here some things happened. As Odin stood near Koenig and Jolpo, he attempted to make good on the promise that he had made to Atha before, but he missed. Koenig immediately pointed his own sword towards Odin and questioned him, and Odin was just barely able to pass off this swing as an accident or a joke or something, and was told by Koenig and Jolpo to be the one to carry Samain's body to the surface. A day after this, you all met the council at an open grave for Samain. They thanked you for your help in stopping the infection of the city, though unbeknownst to them, you had basically started it in the first place. You were all given some money as a reward, as well as the title of Champion of Marathon, which was given to everybody except for Odin due to his attempted attack on Koenig. This title would allow all of you access into the most restricted areas of the city, such as the university library or the council chambers, with no extra hassle. Following Smain's burial, you all decided that it was time to look into the book that you had found within the raid on the manor's basement. Though, before you could take any action, you all received a letter telling you to go to the council chambers to meet with Alito, who was to talk with all of you about the events that had happened as well as the future. So you all met with him, and he questioned you all of what had happened within the last few days. But due to Trissa having asked you to remain private about your prior affairs, you weren't able to share much with him. Though you did mention the book that you had found, and Alito reminded you that with your new stations, you would have access to the library, wherein you could continue your research and gather information on what to do next. At the library, you discovered information regarding strange languages through an old journal that had belonged to an explorer named Bornyi. The journal told of a strange desert catacomb to the north, which perhaps would lead to the answers you sought. Also while at the library, many of the party looked into other subjects, though to varying degrees of success. And so, using a scroll of message that allowed for communication with Alito directly, you asked him whether it would be possible to utilize an airship to travel to the desert. Long story short, Alito was unable to provide an airship to you all, though he did, however, prepare some supplies for you before you left that would hopefully last the duration of the trip. And so you set off northwards, on foot. The first day took you through the Murata Highlands and away from the city. In the afternoon, you ran into some impoverished bandits, and in the early evening, a cave full of nice giant spiders. Later on, not wanting to stay in the spider cave during the night, you all reached the abandoned tower called Limgrave, an outpost that lay on the edge of the forest and was once home to Lupin. Here, Lupin discovered some of his old family treasures and discovered the true fate of his father. Though some of you wished to travel further onwards, Ding was held back, being afraid somehow of the boundary of the forest, as if he had sensed or felt something emanating from within. So you all stayed within the remains of the tower for the night, and as the sun came up, the feeling was gone, so you continued onwards. The second day was uneventful, and the traveling along the game trails was slow but safe. That night, however, held a strange, dreamlike vision, where you all took the place of someone else at a different campfire, with a different camp, with a different party. This person was revealed to be Koenig, and you all shared his POV, as a group the same size as yours sat around a dim fire. Koenig had just been awoken by someone, telling him to get ready, as something was out in the forest, watching them. And as Koenig prepared himself, you could feel his heart beating faster and faster. His great sword now in his hands, he rushed forwards, and as he did, you all found yourselves back at your campfire, a cold sweat, and off in the direction that Koenig had rushed, you saw a strange overgrown deer creature that revealed itself to be a hideous monster, its jaw kind of hanging from its face. The fight didn't last long, and soon you all came out victorious and were able to finish your rests. The next couple of days held more forests, but you were able to find some cool stuff. Firstly, a snowy patch led you all to finding a white chromatic flower growing from a dead tree. Second, the ruins of a long-forgotten chapel led to the discovery of old memories and demonstrated the power that both magic and nature held in conjunction. And third, and finally, you found a strange floating tower, one that seemed to be similar in make to Adamant and the Warforged. And as Adamant reached out to touch the obelisk, a strange green energy was imparted onto him. As you all broke out of the tree line, the party was met with a barren wasteland of miniature rolling hills of impossible colors. Purples, blues, greens, as well as some hues of red and black and yellow. The hills also rolled into each other as well as themselves, creating unnatural overhangs and small caves that seemingly flowed impossibly back into themselves. Not long after traveling through this land, about as soon as the tree line behind you faded into the horizon, great earthquakes began to shake the land, rending and tearing down the ground beneath you. And as some of you tried to run, Ding Ding and Conk fell down one of the great chasms in the earth, with Moza following shortly after to try and save her flightless friend. Here, the party split, with some of you stuck on the surface trying to find your way to safety, and the rest of you lost below, falling. Those on the surface ran a gauntlet of shifting earth, as well as a great tornado that rent the land and seemingly chased you all. But you all just barely made it past all of this, finding safety upon a strange, large mound, which muted and dampened the wind. Sen dug below the mound, finding a great creature buried beneath the earth. And after using Speak with Animals, she secured the party's passage to a safe part of the desert, and learned about ancient seals that were in some way the cause of this area's strangeness. So y'all took the journey upon the back of the giant bison, and during so, took the time to cast Detect Magic, finding an incredible amount of magical energy was flowing upwards from the ground below, almost like a heavy rain in reverse. The bison moved at staggering speeds, making that would have taken multiple days of walking into one. Along the way, you were attacked in the midst of the desert dunes by strange plant-like stars, which caused great pain to the bison, but were of little consequence to you all. As for the other group, Mosa followed behind Ding and Conk as they fell below the ground into the darkness. The two, unable to right themselves or find a way to slow their descent. To them, the ground came too quickly. The instantaneous feeling of their bodies slamming into the hard rock was replaced by nothingness. Mosa, as they fell, you descended as fast as your tiny body could carry you, but you knew that it wasn't enough. And this is when you felt a wave of warmth and comfort fall over you, and an offer was made. The lives of your friends for a favor later on, and you accepted, not wanting to lose Conk, the one person that was actually close to you. The next thing you knew, Mosa, you were at the bottom. Solid ground below you, and floating in front of you were Conk and Ding being held upside down and supported by a gentle red glow surrounding their upper bodies. As the light faded, they dropped to the floor, and you stood over them. After a little bit of trolling Ding, you found yourselves fine and alive, but in a massive subterranean cavern filled with webs. Mosa, with another warm feeling, led the group towards a tunnel, at the end of which you found an older-looking human eating from a bountiful table. The human introduced themselves as Boric and mentioned that he had seen your coming, and he offered you all a deal. In exchange for help in releasing his master, you would all be given a way to escape from the caves. Seeing no better option, you all accepted. Led by Boric, the three of you found yourselves in a sweltering chamber filled with magma almost like an underground ocean. There you were made to solve a puzzle, and after eating a few fireballs to the face, you completed it. The result of completing this puzzle was a violent rumble of the ground, a release of hot, roiling wind, and a wave of lava approaching from the distance. Within the wave, a figure, which appeared the same size to you following this wave, approached. And you met with this figure of great power. Most of you were unable to understand the man's name, but it was obvious he wasn't ordinary. As a personal thanks for saving him, the figure gave Conk a powerful greatsword. And after some questions from everyone, the figure snapped his fingers and the world went black. As the sun was setting, you made it to a cliff of sandstone, a stout change from the at that point windswept dunes. Atop it, you saw an expanse of badlands that stretched to the horizon. You were able to find your way to the ruins that were marked on the map, and there you saw something interesting. The rest of your party that you had seen fall below the earth just a day before was in the central plaza, lying on the ground. The two halves of the party were finally merged back into one. Finally, at the destination of your journey, a reunion. However, as the ones who had fallen below awoke, they had no memory of the events that had taken place, aside from falling and waking up there. You now explored the mausoleum with what little sunlight you had left. The area was quite empty, except for strange ruined stonework, a sundial, and the entrance to the mausoleum itself. Adamant, who had stepped away from the party, had been inspecting this entrance and touched one of the sarcophagi outside of the entry stair. This sarcophagus he touched opened, and a slimy, bandaged hand reached out and grabbed Adamant's. A fight ensued, and the mummies were quickly dispatched. But there was not enough time to explore the remainder of the exterior. An attempt to rest was foiled by more mummies and the coming of a sandstorm, which forced you all into the mausoleum stairway, just barely getting out of the path of the blisteringly fast wall of dust. Following some investigating, you found out how to enter the mausoleum, and found that a liquid-like darkness coalesced within. This didn't stop you, however, as you pushed through it, reaching a room with 2 doors, 2 riddles, and a mirror. You found that the mirror answered questions at the expense of your vitality, and the riddles led to 2 different paths forward. Choosing the left door, you went into a maze, finding multiple different challenges awaiting you at the different exits. These included a hallway that went on forever, a bookstand surrounded by benches and strange congealed slime-like blood, and the exit, as well as a few things that you didn't find or didn't want to explore. The bookstand was important, as when Mosa and Sen placed your book and tried to read from it, they were both sent into shock and unconsciously had a shared dream, explaining to the rest of the party that you had seen a massive, blurry figure who spoke to you and was seemingly involved with everything. Some kind of deity in a long-off place in a dark cave with crystals on the ceiling that almost acted as a night sky. You all eventually found your way through the maze, and now mostly out of the inky shadows, finding yourselves in a large, well-lit room filled with torches. A few tar-like pits seemed to create the shadows swirling around your waists. 2 sarcophagi flanked a large statue in the center of the room, and as you approached, voices called out to you, telling you to leave as a final warning. One of you didn't heed, and a fight broke out between you and 2 much more powerful mummies, who seemed to call other undead from the tar. After a drawn-out fight, you defeated them, and entered a new room past this one, a library filled with old bookshelves. On inspection, many of these shelves were trapped, but some contained valuable items and abilities. You felt safe enough to take a rest here, and you did, uninterrupted. After the rest, at the back of a raised part of the room, there was another book, chained down to the shelf and unable to be moved or opened. Through Conk and Lupin's attempts, the chains were unlocked, and a massive crash was heard in the adjacent room. In the book was a short puzzle telling you all how to move forward into the next room, and while trying to progress in the puzzle from the previous room, a massive stone creature walked in. And essentially, you all needed to play Silent Library, solving the puzzle without making noise. Wrong attempts called to the creature, and some of you even tried to fight with it to no avail. But eventually, the puzzle was solved, and this creature, a great stone gargoyle called the Librarian, ceased its movement. Onto the next area, you also saw a massive cave, an obviously fake night sky magically projected onto the cavern ceiling, and just a bit past it you could see the actual ceiling. Here there were machines, biotechnics, and other sorts of oddities and laboratories, but eventually you found the massive machine mounted onto the ceiling. Manipulating the contraption, on a large raised pedestal stood a giant of blazing red skin and horns, with great wings and brass-like armor. Upon the giant's head, a crown of green thorns. Upon seeing you all, the giant glided down to you all and introduced himself as Carrion, and answered a couple of your questions. As he did, the crown of thorns began to burn, and Carrion's eyes glazed over. He then delivered a brutal ultimatum: either die or become a part of his experiment. Combat wasn't short, and Carrion was able to withstand great amounts of damage due to the influence of the crown, allowing him to stand back up when the fight seemed like it was over. Yet you prevailed, as eventually the crown took enough damage and burned itself to ashes, freeing Carrion and allowing him to stand and fully answer all of your questions. Free from the crown's influence, he now did answer all of your questions, telling you who Borgny was, and how that Borgny was the chosen of one of the Elder Gods, who were the shapers of different aspects of the world. He spoke of the ancient tongue, and that he knew it, but that its power wasn't meant for those as fragile as mortals. After answering your questions, Carrion left, but not before giving his axe as a gift to you all before freeing him. Now armed with the knowledge you came for, you all returned to the desert surface unabated. Sen called out to the bison, and from below the cliff's edge it rose, its back now a sandy dune as opposed to the grassy hillock it was before. The bison, though moving a bit slower, took you all the same way backwards to the forest's edge, in a ride that only took a day. On the way, you saw that the strange magical energy had entirely ceased, with the ground remaining still and the wind being calm. You all disembarked at the edge of the forest and thanked the bison for its help. Shortly after beginning your travels once again through the forest, a strange magic overtook most of the party, with only Sen and Mosa resisting, forcing those affected to walk in a straight line southward. Finding no way to cure the rest of the party, Sen and Mosa hitched a ride, and about doubly as fast as it would be normally, you all breached the marathon side of the forest, with the magical effect stopping immediately after leaving the forest's bounds. For those affected, it felt like the original trip through, with nights camping and enjoying each other's company. Though anyway, you all made it back to Marathon safely, being greeted by Guard Captain Willian, who led you immediately to the council chambers, where you all debriefed the council. In the council chambers, Mosa, Konk, and Ding were surprised to see Boric, the one that had dealt with them when they had fell into the cave for their return to the surface. Immediately, all of the memories of what happened below the earth were returned to you, as well. Questioning led to nothing, as the rest of the council members that Boric had returned on his skyship from the other continent just a few days prior. Following this, Alito told you all that you would be contacted once the council had further need of you, and you were all given a month and a half worth of rest and downtime for you all to be at your own devices, during which you all made some magic items, went to the library to study, and generally had a decent time, and only murdered one person, so that's cool. Good job, guys. Throughout the downtime, as you all traveled throughout the city, with or without company, you found yourselves in the midst of a slow but not subtle change. The temperature dropped steadily, and on the second week into your 5, the first snows began to fall. You all watched, and some of you tried to help to the best of your ability, as society slowed to a halt. It became impossible to not notice how many of the smaller streets away from the main slowly became dangerous. Muggings were commonplace, and happiness within the city dwindled. The food shortage caused by the firebombing of the industrial district became evident, as the lack of winter stores caused many to go hungry. Those fortunate enough to have food stored away often gave it, in an attempt to either help those in need or to save themselves from harm. Shops were destroyed in riots, homes broken into, and through it all, the snow fell. The sky, an ever-present source of frustration for the good people of the city. Snow piled onto the streets, just enough to make it dangerous to walk outside. A good 2 feet of snow constantly layered the ground, as city workers did their best to keep as many of the streets from it as possible, though were only able to keep the upper echelon of society cleared. Certain shops stayed open, at risk to themselves, but little to no business came. Rumors began to spread of groups hoarding food, crime lords, cults, and the greed of the rich. Hope dwindled further and further, until many houses on the main streets boarded up, their windows out of fear. Names swirled throughout the rumors, whispered in bars, inns, and taverns. Some new, and some all too familiar. Atha, the Ascended, a union of people, a stronghold hidden somewhere in the city, anarchy, and conflict. A lawless zone and tent city formed in the remains of Iana. What little buildings that remained were surrounded by tents and ramshackle housing. Finally, when the time came for your meeting with Alito, you all headed to the university, where you met him in his small tower office. He spoke to you and tasked you all with investigating the rumors just mentioned, giving you a starting place in the Iana slum tent city, and giving you as much information that he had access to. Additionally, he told of a winter ball that would be taking place in 2 weeks' time, which the party was invited to, given their ranks as champions of Marathon, including Odin, though he also wasn't a champion. So you all went to Iana to meet with Atha, who is very obviously the one behind the scenes there. And there, you saw a general improvement to the atmosphere than to the other not so well off parts of the city. People speaking loudly, children running around and playing in the snow, and small artisan stalls set up throughout. After some interesting decisions and the loss of Lupin's money and homunculus servant, you all met with Atha, discussing his plans to kill Koenig as well as the party that would be taking place soon, and decided that you would be all meeting up at the party to enact your plans to kill Koenig there. Additionally, Atha told you all of the many different players within the higher castes of the city, the different founding families, which are the Horix, which is Triss's family, the Ruad Basak clan, the Vimo, the Low Dancers, the Marathi family, which the city is named after, the Azams, the Larates, which is Koenig's family, and the Briants, which you knew a smith who belonged to that family. He mostly told you general information, like who they were, and who were likely to be dangerous, or things just less than well known, like what families had money or didn't. And lastly, you all discussed what would happen after the death of Koenig, going back and forth and trading morals with Atha. As the day progressed, you went to go talk with Charon Briant, the last of that family, and discussed much of the same with him, not gaining too much out of him. Though you did notice that when you were talking about these families, he did have a strange, almost suspect attitude, closing the door and making sure no one was listening outside. The sun set as you all went to the Wispy Moon Tavern to debrief, and then to Conk and Moses' house, where you all decided to stay the night. Though before going to bed, Odin went to do some scouting at Lorade Manor, finding numerous guards and peeking through an upstairs window by climbing a tree, finding an old man with long gray blonde hair, obviously a relative of Sir Koenig and Atha. Late that night, Odin returned home. And this is as far as the story has progressed. 2 years of fun. And hopefully, here's to more.